Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Arianna Vitali, and I'm Secretary General at the Coalition for Energy Savings. And I have the great pleasure to be with you at this first edition of the European Energy Efficiency Days. This afternoon, I will be moderating a section that looks at how energy efficiency can drive Europe's energy independence. Energy security is dominating the EU and the national agendas. The energy prices for households and businesses are skyrocketing, and the impacts of climate change are becoming more severe and frequent. The positive news is that there is broad agreement that saving energy can address all these challenges simultaneously. We are also very positively seeing that many member states, local authorities, and citizens are putting in place rapid energy efficiency actions and behavioral measures to quickly slash energy use as a response to the current energy crisis. But we are also, unfortunately, witnessing that this broad support for energy savings does not yet translate into a real paradigm shifts that put energy efficiency measures at the heart of an energy security strategy that is fully aligned with climate neutrality. Long-lasting measures that cut energy use in a sustained way beyond emergency energy rationing are still not prioritized enough. Energy efficiency is still too often the unsung hero of the energy transition, as Commissioner Simpson said once. But with our guest today, we'll try to show that we have the tools, both at the EU and at national level, to change this dynamic and to operationalize the energy efficiency principle across sectors. First, we'll kick off our discussion with a very interesting presentation from Jean-Sébastien Brock. Jean-Sébastien is associate at the Institute for European Energy and Climate Policy. Beyond the many barriers that energy efficiency is facing, he's arguing that energy efficiency is also suffering from a visualization problem. You will know more about it in a second. After this presentation, we'll exchange with a panel of distinguished guests that you can already see in your screen. First, if she manages to join, we will have Ms. Paola Pigno. She's the Director for Just Transition, Consumers, Energy Efficiency and Innovation at the Director General for Energy in the European Commission. I hope she will join. Then we have Mr. Gilberto Dialuce. He is the President of the Italian Energy Agency, ENEA. And finally, we have as well with us Matthias Bach, who's director at Agora Energiewende, where he leads the European energy policy work. Before we dive into the session, let me also go through some few housekeeping rules. First, the session is being recorded and will be available on the EU's website after the event. We are also live on Twitter, so do not hesitate to keep the discussion going, also on social media. Our hashtag is EEDayEU. And finally, for all the audience, you can engage directly with panelists by typing your question in the question and answer box. I'll do my best to redirect all the questions to the different speakers in the second part of the session. So without further ado, I leave the floor to Jean-Sébastien Brock for his presentation. We can all listen to it, and then we'll come back to discussion together once he has finished. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Arianna. Can you hear me well? That's all fine, and you see the slide full screen? Okay, perfect. Thanks a lot for the introduction, and also for the invitation to speak today about how and why accounting energy efficiency in the energy mix. So I will start with the why. The energy mix, that's often the starting point when one thinks about defining an energy strategy. But here we miss one major contribution to the energy balance. Look at the way the energy mix is represented in these three figures from Eurostat main publication on energy. Do you see energy efficiency here? I don't think so, so it's not visible. And that's not only about the picture. What is not visible is usually not prioritized. Here you see the table of contents of the EU energy in figures. And if you look at the part 2, that is about energy in the EU, that starts with supply imports dependency, and then you have energy efficiency only close to the end of this chapter. This order that comes from the energy flow that goes from the supply to the end use. And that makes sense when you want to represent either a Sankey diagram like here or any type of energy statistics. But when you think about designing a policy or a strategy, the flow should be the reverse. You should start from the needs. Why? First, because what is needed is not energy per se, that's the service that is delivered by energy that you need. And the second point is that any savings that you do at the end use will deliver higher savings at the supply end, because you save all the losses that you go along the way. So in transmission, distribution, generation, etc. And that's, for example, what Amaury Lovins has demonstrated for more than 40 years with his concept of radical energy efficiency and integrative design. That say, it would not be true to say that energy efficiency is not visible anywhere. It is, but mostly aside. And that's what you see here on these three examples from Eurostat, EIA, and ENEA in different reports or different sections of website, etc. The Italian report, annual report on energy efficiency, is a very good example about what these reports can provide in terms of useful information and data for policymakers and stakeholders. But still, that if we would have energy efficiency represented in the energy mix, that would help to get energy efficiency higher on the policy agenda. So how can we do that? I will briefly present three different approaches that could be used to better to make, let's say, more visible energy efficiency. And that's nothing new. That's things that are already available and quite mature. The first one, that's the top-down approach using energy efficiency indicators and decomposition analysis. That's quite, let's say, well-established practices in Europe now. The EEDayEU project has developed that for more than 30 years. This project covers the 27 member states and even more. How does it go? The decomposition analysis that makes you see the evolution in the energy consumption, usually between two different years. So let's say here, for example, 2005 and 2020, or here in that case, 2015. And you see the different factors explaining this evolution. So structural, activity, weather or climate, and energy efficiency improvement. That's the ones in the red circles. And that's also an approach, by the way, that is used by some of the member states when they report to the energy efficiency directive and that they need to justify the evolution in their energy consumption as regard the Article 3 target. The same approach can be used to build different graphs, as you can see here. And what is interesting in this graph, especially the one on the left-hand side, is that it shows the cumulative effect of energy efficiency improvement. And Ariana, you pointed that in your introduction. Energy efficiency keep delivering energy savings over time. And that's the only energy carrier that does that. All the other ones, they need to be renewed constantly. And that's why you see that over time that becomes the first fuel. These graphs have from the very first energy efficiency report done by the EEDayEU back in 2013, so almost 10 years ago. And that's the message that delivered in this. If you remember the announcement of this report at that time, that was energy efficiency coming from Eden to first fuel. And that also was one of the evidence that led to the EU to adopt the energy efficiency principle later on in the clean energy package. That said, that's not so easy to get that graphs. You need some choices in terms of methodology and so on. You see some methodological issues on the left, but you have the same on when you represent the supply side. I mean, that's not like if the supply side statistics come directly easy. You can think about how nuclear is represented in the French energy balance. You can think about the differences between Eurostat energy balances and national energy balances. So that's all a matter of agreement and convention. And there is no reason why there could not be an agreement on energy efficiency like you have on the statistics on supply or consumption. No technical barrier for that. That's already possible. There is even already an ISO standard about decomposition analysis. So the question here is rather, is there a political will to agree on the way energy efficiency could be shown or represented in the energy mix? That's not a technical issue. Then you could have the complementary approach. So I spoke about top-down, I know very briefly about bottom-up. Bottom-up, that's mostly monitoring and evaluation of policies and programs, and you can add up these results. And in the same way, you show how this contributes to the energy mix. That's an example here from California, where you see the contribution from the utilities energy efficiency program to the electricity mix. And we could do the same in Europe if we use the results from the energy efficiency obligation scheme from member states or from other schemes, as long as they have a comprehensive monitoring system. And that's the important point here about bottom-up. Again, there are some issues, and the main difficulty for bottom-up compared to top-down is that by essence, top-down is comprehensive. You get directly all the energy efficiency improvements in the country or in the EU, while for the bottom-up, you need to track all the policies to sum up, to look at the overlap, etc. That's a bit more difficult. So bottom-up, I would say maybe not the best option to represent energy efficiency in the mix. However, essential if you want to know what works, what does not work, and to evaluate your policies. In terms of harmonization, I would say for top-down, that could be done more easily, very difficult for bottom-up. And we know that, I mean, I've been working on that for 15 years. So if you want, I can tell you more. Okay, but still bottom-up is very important to value the impact of policies. And we all know that if you do not value a policy, then it disappears and you give the priority to something else. And that's also important for energy efficiency to be considered in planning. In the previous slide, I was speaking about past achievements or trends, but that's also important to have energy efficiency visible in the future when we discuss future targets or commitments. That's what was done in the NFS scenarios, comparing different level of energy efficiency ambition. And from that, you can build this type of graph. Again, you show that shows the cumulative effect of energy efficiency. But here there is one important point to note when we use this kind of forward-looking scenarios is that part of the energy efficiency improvements are already included in the baseline. So what you see here, in the red circle, that's additional energy efficiency improvement. Actually, if we would like to calculate the total contribution of energy efficiency in the target year in 2050, that would be higher because you will need to also consider what is included as part as in terms of energy efficiency in the baseline. Using the same data, you could also draw graphs that are closer to the representation of energy mix, what I've done here. So you have the one of the starting year, 2020. Here you don't have energy efficiency because that's hidden in the baseline. And then you can show energy efficiency in the target year. Here that's 2050. And I just tried two options to make it. There can be other options, but let's say that's probably the easiest one. First one, you include in your mix the energy that would have been consumed if in the absence of these additional energy efficiency improvements. And you can see that's the red bar here in the middle, and that's quite significant. And the other option is you reduce the pie. So you consider the actual energy consumption that is expected in 2050, but you clearly show that it's smaller. So in that case, the idea is to show that energy efficiency make your energy supply issue smaller. And I think that right now we know very well what it means, an energy supply issue. So to conclude, there are also issues, methodological issues when you build scenarios. As for any type of approach to represent energy efficiency, because energy efficiency, that's a relative quantity, that's always compared to something. So you need to define the baseline, and there can be a lot of discussion about that. And also when you think about forward-looking scenarios, as I said, you hide part of the historical improvements in the baseline. So we should not forget that when we show different scenarios, what we see in terms of energy efficiency, that's just part of it, that's the additional part of it. But in practice, the contribution of energy efficiency is much larger. And at the end, what matters, whatever the way you want to represent the energy mix or the scenarios, etc., is that at least you find a way to make energy efficiency visible, you keep it transparent, and you choose a way that is in line with the purposes of your exercise. So let's say, depending on the objective of your scenario or the statistics. And that's it for me. I hope I was not too long. And if you are interested in more information about the energy efficiency first principle more broadly and how to implement it, I recommend to visit the NFS website. You will find very interesting reports here, and you can contact me if you want to know more. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Jean-Sébastien, for this very useful presentation that gives other ways of thinking to the barriers to the materialization of energy efficiency. I found it very interesting, and thanks for your input. I also would like to welcome Paola. I see she managed to join, so we are very happy to be here, that you are here. First of all, I would like to ask the speakers your comments about Jean-Sébastien presentation. So do you think that classifying energy efficiency as a source into the energy mix is essential to provide long-term structural answer to the Europe's climate energy goals? If yes, how this can be done? Can it be done? What are the challenges, in your opinion, both methodologically and politically? And maybe I'll start with Matthias, as Paula has just started. So Matthias, the floor is yours.
So thank you, and thank you for this interesting kickoff, Jean-Sébastien. Just a few reflections. So, of course, I fully support the objective of giving more visibility to the benefit of efficiency policies to moving forward, as it is usually done. As you were pointing out in the general display of where we stand with transition, this is not given sufficient visibility. The practical question for me that it boils down to is how to operationalize this perspective. And we've been discussing this in the last legislative mandate with Clean Energy for All Europeans, looking at energy efficiency first. And I would say that we probably fell short in that last legislative cycle to operationalize energy efficiency first. So when thinking about it, of course, it's obvious the importance. Just thinking about the power sector transition, all scenarios show that the power sector transition is driving also the decarbonization of the other sectors. The less demand we have in transport, in buildings, in industry for energy, the less renewable power capacity do we need to build up in the power system. So there's a very clear relationship which has system costs implications, etc. Now, one of the questions, where does this come in? In my view, this needs to come in at the level of strategic energy planning. So when member states do their NECPs, the long-term strategic planning, their energy efficiency thinking needs to be brought into the picture. It needs to be operationalized at the level of concrete infrastructure systems, so in energy infrastructure planning. And there, so far, we have, I believe, some quite good hooks in the Energy Efficiency Directive, where there would be some obligatory planning on municipalities of a certain size to do integrated planning also for efficiency. It is notable, and I say this to Ms. Pinho, that when you look at the gas and hydrogen package, it is completely disconnected of any thinking about energy efficiency and demand reduction in a situation where the Commission numbers show that we will see a 60% fossil gas demand reduction in this decade. But there is really almost zero in the gas and hydrogen package to operationalize this thinking when it comes to planning for the way forward. And then we have, I believe, also the level of public spending, so public procurement, and to what extent efficiency thinking comes into procurement practices that you would be obliged as a public authority to also weigh the spending for not using energy versus investing into some energy sources. So I think those are the main levers that I can see where this could be operationalized for energy efficiency directly. I think we are on a good track for gas, hydrogen. No, we are completely not on a good track, and public procurement is not really the focus of this Fit for 55 debate, but I think it will need to get more visibility in the next mandate.
Thank you, Matthias, especially for your reflection on energy planning. And that's where I think really the synergies among the sectors have big potential to be grasped. I'd like to turn to Mr. Dialuce, the same question. Do you see this possible to make energy efficiency as a source into the national energy mix? What would it take to make this happen in Italy, for example?
Good afternoon to everybody, and let me start saying many thanks to Mr. Brock for this very interesting presentation, and also for mentioning the report our agency ENEA issues every year about all the energy efficiency requirements and policy in the Italian system. From a general point of view, we agree with this idea to take into account the very important role of energy efficiency. ENEA is working in Italy as the agency, the public agency for energy efficiency. And our mission is to issue guidelines to help the public administration and also all the private companies to improve the energy efficiency program inside their production plants, but also to support the the local and central public administration for their policy in energy efficiency, to restore their buildings, but also for the Ministry of the Ecological Transition to issue all the decree to enhance the energy efficiency sector, but also to implement the European Union legislation in Italy. And we think that this approach could be very useful to highlight the different contribution of the various measures we can take to enhance energy efficiency, and also to develop some scenarios, take into account also the different policies that can be achieved. And it is also important, this approach, to evaluate the cost-benefit ratio of the different measures that the local government and the central government could take to improve, and also to enhance, mainly in this period, the important role of energy efficiency to give an important contribution for the security of supply. But from a general point of view, the deployment of energy efficiency poses complex policy challenges, especially the current landscape that is characterized by a very critical energy emergency. The Italian government has taken already broad actions for dealing with safeguarding security of energy supply, also alleviating the increasing energy burden on households and businesses, and to cope with additional consequences caused by the deterioration of the general economic landscape. So the idea to have some short-term perspectives for these objectives required to mobilize significant resources in the current situation. Take into account the readily implementable measures that are aimed to reduce the energy bills, the energy consumption by means of the energy efficiency measure. But however, the policymakers must not lose the focus on the long-term energy and the environmental targets. The strategy to overcome the crisis and to achieve at the same time the decarbonization objectives is complex, it's very complex, and is articulated on several fronts. But it's clear that this strategy necessarily goes through all the available policy for the decarbonization on supply side and demand sides. Not only to increase renewables and infrastructure, increase the production of biofuels, biomethane, and hydrogen, but we need also to reduce energy demand in buildings and in all productive processes. So in this context, it's crucial to focus the attention to this high support that energy efficiency could give to all the governments. So this method could be very useful to highlight the approach.
Thank you for this. And Paola, what's your perspective? I hope we can hear you well. I mean, would it be possible for the European Commission in their next publication, in their next impact assessments, to really showcase energy savings as an energy source at the same pair of gas or electricity? do you think this approach would work?
Thank you, Ariana, and my apologies because it was simply impossible to join through the PC, so I had to fall back to other sources, and now it's an iPad that I managed to find. Good. I'm sorry for this. Well, you know, I think for the bad reasons, energy efficiency has now been really, as never before, at the forefront. We've been within a few years. It's the third crisis we're facing. We started with a climate crisis. We're still on it. We still haven't gone through it. We went then to a public health crisis through COVID, and now an energy crisis. And to all these three, energy efficiency is part of the answer. And I think this started to sink in everybody's minds. And the issue now, of course, is, and as we face the high energy bills, as we face energy security problems, where we know we need to reduce demand, both of gas and of electricity, more and more energy efficiency is coming to the surface as a reply. Now we need to distinguish between the immediate answers in terms of reduction of demand and the structural changes. That's where really the energy efficiency comes in, and structural changes in the way we produce, in the way we consume, and the way we distribute energy. And I think the challenge is indeed, how do we measure it? How do we give it a size? And I think we've been forced to find ways to measure it by saying, if you now deploy heat pumps in your buildings, this is how much BCM of gas you'll be able to save. So we've been, in a way, also triggered by all these crises. We were forced to find ways and make it very, very tangible. What is it that the energy efficiency can bring, and to express it in ways that everybody understands? Because part of the challenge with energy efficiency is, yes, how do you quantify it, right? And the primary energy function and the final energy consumption. It's very difficult also for any citizen to understand exactly what are we talking about. So part of the challenge has to do with the communication and how we go about it. And I think, in a way, all these crises have forced us to be more creative on the way how we translate this energy efficiency gains and the efficiencies of the energy system. And we need to continue to build on that, because otherwise, indeed, it's the invisible part of the mix, right? And which is the one that we want to promote.
Exactly. So maybe, Jean-Sébastien, I'll turn it to you. How other countries are using this approach and making these invisible benefits of energy efficiency visible? Can you share with us examples that are existing maybe around the world on how other countries really consider energy efficiency as a part of their energy mix?
Well, I don't know. I would say I don't know any example where it is officially endorsed. What is clear, and that's what I tried to show in the presentation, is that it is technically feasible. So you will find studies or reports, but usually that will be done a part of the main energy discussion. So that's so you will have that scenarios. Let's say, for example, when negotiating the energy efficiency directive. But then if you look at the main EU scenarios, you don't see that. So yeah, in a sense you could, because you say, okay, there is the ambitious scenario and the baseline scenario, and the difference. Most of it, that's thanks to energy efficiency, but that's not presented like that. At least that's so we always see in the words, in the speeches, that we should start with energy, the cleanest energy, so the one we don't consume, etc. But then when we go to the hard facts, let's say the hard figures, etc., that all that disappear, and we start with thinking about, okay, where can I get gas from another country, instead of starting by how can I reduce my gas consumption, for example. And I fully agree with what Paolo Pino said. But that's a pity that we wait until we are up against the wall before doing something. Even not talking about higher ambition, if all the policies that have been previously adopted were completely implemented, our current issue with gas, Russian gas, would be much smaller. And I'm assuming Matthias Beck will completely agree with me on that, especially speaking about Germany and the gap between their target and their achievements. So that's also that's maybe we don't take energy efficiency seriously enough beyond the words. So, and for that you need to monitor, you need to make it visible, and you need to evaluate. Otherwise, you don't know what happens, and I guess that's also a lack of trust in energy efficiency. That's why I fully understand why, and that was also one of the comments by Mr. Timmermans this morning, that about one of the questions he get, that look, that's nice to work on energy efficiency, but at the end of the day, if during the winter some people are feeling cold, that's what we need to manage first. So we need to provide them with gas.
Well, I guess this shows probably the fact that in a certain sense, we know what the long-term solution it is, but there has been clearly delays on putting it into practice. And now we are facing a situation in which we need to run in an emergency and maybe have choices that will unfortunately have lock-in effects for the years to come. But yes, maybe Matthias, can you tell us a bit more about the German situation, which is of course a case in point in relation to gas dependency? How what role is Berlin giving to the energy efficiency policies to reduce dependence from gas imports?
Yeah, so I think I do a combination of reacting perhaps to what has been said before and where we stand in the German debate. So of course for Germany, clearly we have been, when it comes to the specific dependency on Russia as a supplier of fossil fuels, and particularly gas, we have been moving into the wrong direction, at least since the annexation of Crimea. And of course, we're not the only country in Europe that has been doing it, but one that is, so this has been, in retrospect, wrong decisions. I think this is widely recognized now. It doesn't really help us going forward. But if I just look from the perspective of what it does to the debate on energy efficiency, so like Jean-Sébastien has said, energy efficiency also in Germany has had insufficient visibility in the public debate on the transition, very clear. And the targets that we set ourselves for reducing energy demand in the building sector, for instance, have repeatedly not been met because the understanding of the importance of efficiency and savings has not been at the center of attention, but much more to green, to achieve the transition in the power sector. This has been the main success story, the German context. Now, what the current crisis, and this is different from the climate crisis and then the COVID crisis, really has driven home is that we have unprecedented prices for fossil fuels and the consequence also for power. And so this has put saving energy, not consuming energy, really at the center of the debate. And so at the moment, I think we have this historic opportunity really to operationalize thinking on saving energy. And of course, this is conceptually a bit different from energy efficiency as such, but at the moment, this is the name of the game, how to save energy as fast as possible. And of course, what Paula Pino already said, there are like two challenges. One is the very short term, just mostly behavioral measures, how you can reduce demand. If you think about buildings, lowering room temperature, checking your gas thermal heating system, boiler settings, etc. So this actually goes already quite some way in very significantly saving. Gas in particular, also in industry, a lot is happening, but most of this so far has been driven by high prices. Let's be very honest about it. if we look at it, the last numbers from the Deutsche BNetzA, where year-on-year household gas consumption clearly is much below temperature adjusted what we have seen in previous years, or industrial gas use is much below, on the average like 20% compared to previous years. So this is entirely driven by prices. We have not really started to operationalize the demand reduction when it comes to structurally reducing the demand. And the challenges we are very much aware of, this means in the building sector, scaling heat pumps, in particular, so replacing fossil-fired heating systems by clean electricity heating systems. In its building renovation, there we have now a major challenge simply to increase the renovation rate. I think this is all across Europe. And I do believe there are some challenges coming up with the changing economic context. So we have interest rates rising, which will make some of these capital-intensive investments into the clean energy transition seem less interesting compared to just business as usual. So we need to probably rethink on how do we best support the investments into the clean transition, given this dramatically changed economic context as well. And I would believe that this is something that needs to also happen at the EU level, where we have a number of funding instruments, the normal EU budget, but in particular the Next Generation EU recovery budget, where there's still some flexibility also from the national level to adjust some of the intended spending going forward. And probably this really needs to happen given the dramatically changed economic context.
Yes, exactly. And I think, as you correctly said, there is already financing available. There was financing available already in the Next Generation EU to put forward energy efficiency measures, also to help local authorities doing so. So I think it's clearly the moment in which there is a combination of needs and resources available to use in that direction. I would like to hear as well from Gilberto Dialuce about the situation in Italy. So how Italy is deploying energy efficiency to mitigate the current energy crisis. Can you tell us about a bit more about Italy, how Italy is tackling the removal of barriers, how Italy is helping financing energy efficiency measures?
The actual implementation of the energy efficiency first principle requires not only in Italy the policymakers to address multiple barriers depending on the different sector that must be targeted. In Italy, as I mentioned before, a large deal of the untapped energy efficiency potential lies in the building sector. The civil end users account for about 46% of the final energy consumption and about 19% of GHG emission in Italy. The sector is assigned, for this reason, the lion's share, 60% of the planned energy savings in 2030 set out in the Italian Integrated National Energy and Climate Plan. That's to say about 9.3 million TEPs per year. And also the focus of the net zero perspective in 2050 established by the long-term strategy we adopted. So these figures emphasize the key relevance of the long-term policy aimed to support the deployment of energy efficiency in buildings within the overall Italian energy and climate strategy. But nevertheless, the Italian building stock poses some burdensome and complex challenges because the residential reduced the most sudden progress towards the goals defined by the Italian Energy Efficiency Action Plan. Nevertheless, between 2011 and 2020, the cumulated energy savings overshot the expected target of more than 17 70 percentage points, the sector is still far from playing the role of interconnected energy infrastructure. Because if we give a look to the information report in our strategy for energy retrofitting of the national building stock, about 70% of the residential buildings were constructed before the first national law addressing mandatory energy efficiency requirements in buildings. And the state of conservation of these buildings is rated by the occupants as bad or very bad. So analyzing the data from the energy performance system that is managed by ENEA, we observed that despite the slight increasing trend of the percentage of the most energy performing buildings, buildings in EPC class F and G are still the absolute majority. So on a long-term perspective, the nearly zero energy buildings are still a very negligible share of the entire stock. So we need a lot of effort for this. So in our policy to reduce the costs caused by the energy inefficient buildings will be exploited by a lot of different institutional and behavioral policy to address the barriers. For instance, the public intervention could be enhance the incentives toward intervention that allow to maximize the cost effectiveness and the social impact to benefit the most disadvantaged categories, but also to stimulate the mobilization of the private resources and to facilitate the diffusion of energy-saving technology and devices that could allow a more conscious approach to the energy use, and also to support the implementation of innovative building techniques that can harmonize energy efficiency deployment and also the reduction of the environmental impact. And finally, also to reduce the complexity of legislation we have in Italy, because we have a lot of overlappings and contradictions sometimes, a lot of regulation and red tape in all the significant steps of project authorization, design, and execution. And we need also to promote the empowerment of citizens and entities, some form of interaction and sharing for energy production and consumption. So a lot of work to do, and on all this point, ENEA is actively engaged with research and policy support activities.
Thanks. Thanks. Very, very interesting. You mentioned, and also Matthias mentioned several times, the energy efficiency first principle and how this should be operationalized. We know that the Commission has been really a champion on this sense by introducing the energy efficiency principle first in the governance regulation, now as an article in the revision of the energy efficiency directive. So I wanted to hear from Paola how you see this discussion going in the closing of the negotiation. I mean, we are still not with the negotiation, the idea just started, but of course the proposal from the Commission is clear, the European Parliament is reinforcing it, member states seem a bit more reluctant, so I wanted to get your feedback on how do you see this will be reflected in the next steps, also because the energy efficiency first principle is really a way to visualize the energy efficiency benefits through, for example, the introduction of a cost benefits methodologies. So anything you could share with us would be really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Ariana. And before going into that, just also to build on what Matthias said, linked to the difference of this crisis and indeed how energy efficiency will absolutely help addressing the high energy bills. And what is interesting in this context is that with the absolutely unprecedented high prices that we're seeing, energy efficiency has become much more cost efficient. So much so that in the negotiations of the Energy Efficiency Directive, precisely, we've been asked, and you know that the Commission has indeed put forward also a more ambitious target in the course of negotiations through the REPowerEU. So we have increased our own proposal for a target not only in the context of the need to do more and faster in the current context where we really want to accelerate the transition and put an end to our dependence on fossil fuels, but also because, in fact, it becomes more cost efficient with the current prices when maybe the shift to a heat pump would have been considered out of question. Now, with the prices as we see them on gas, for instance, it becomes much more interesting. So just to build on what Matthias was saying. Then on the energy efficiency first, and indeed you mentioned it, we first have foreseen it in the governance regulation, and there we've asked member states to really put energy efficiency first, meaning also in the planning across the sectors, no matter what we're talking about, look at the potential of energy efficiency before you take any further decisions. And that was, let's say, the warming up, because this was a new concept, but it was interesting to see already in the national energy and climate plans how member states have gone about it. And then in the energy efficiency directive that it's currently being negotiated, we have really enshrined it in the energy efficiency directive. We have also last year put forward a very clear recommendation and guidance on how to go about energy efficiency first, because it's still a bit theoretical. So we wanted to really bring it down to the very concrete sectors and say in various sectors, how can it best be applied? And we are seeing some results. We're seeing how it is being really translated into reality and really much more present also in the planning, right? Where before you would not consider it when thinking about infrastructure, when thinking about the conception of buildings, and now it's much more present. In terms of the negotiations overall, well, and independently of the energy efficiency first principle, we're seeing, I think we are witnessing that both in the European Parliament and in the Council, there is a clear understanding and agreement on how crucial energy efficiency has become, even more in the current context, which explains that in the European Parliament, we have now a report from the rapporteur, Mr. Fulsang, which really gained cross-party support and pushed up the ambition that the Commission had put forward. In the Council, it's making good progress. So we see that really there's a lot of support behind, and now maybe for the wrong reasons, but a clear understanding that this is the time to finally seize the potential of energy efficiency across the board, across the economy in various sectors. We mentioned buildings, and Gilberto mentioned buildings. Of course, we have there also the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, where we're looking specifically into the potential of buildings and energy efficiency and in buildings, which is huge, is together with transport is really where you can still seize the biggest potential in terms of energy efficiency. But okay, this is another question, otherwise I will monopolize the discussion.
Yeah, no, but definitely the building sector is the one that is focusing our attention, and definitely the building sector can and should be considered as a part of the energy system infrastructure of the EU, because at the end of the day, that's where most of the energy EU citizens are using, of course, the transport sector, and is a sector that is still lagging behind in terms of renovations, and has a lot of potential to move forward. So maybe in this context, Matthias, you know that you are reflecting as well on the building sector as Agora, and are there any recommendation that you would like to give in on how to integrate better building renovation in the full energy system discussion? We'll have us, I'll go back then to Gilberto as well, maybe to ask about the Italian Superbond system that is also has been a clear example of how countries have trying to tackle the different barriers to finance energy efficiency upgrades. But Matthias, if you want to react to that.
Okay, sorry, I couldn't. Ariana, you have to help me with your question. So I can say a few words on the building transition in Germany, perhaps just to to show the, let's say, the magnitude of the challenge that we're facing. We are, according to our German climate, we are not on track, of course, for the building sector. And there are essentially three levers that we need to pull. The first one is to replace fossil heating systems by non-fossil heating systems as fast as possible. The lead technology there is heat pumps. According to the modeling that we have done for Climate Neutral Germany 2045, Germany would need to install per year about 500,000 heat pumps from 2023 onwards. So this is a huge step up in heat pump deployment. There are shortages in just the craftsperson, the skilled workers that could install heat pumps. There is, at the moment at least, a lot of investment into heat pump production capacity in Europe, in Germany, in Poland, in other member states, which is very good. But whether we have sufficient capacity in Europe in the short term, let's see. Very clearly, this is one of the fastest growing technologies, and rightly so. But it's still a very steep acceleration that we need to see there. The second is the faster and deeper renovation of buildings. And like across Europe, in Germany, the annual renovation rate has been notoriously about 50% of what is needed under the scenarios that we're having. And the question is, do we get there? And of course, what Gilberto already said, now is the time, and this is as well recognized in Germany, to focus on the least performing buildings, because there we have the lowest hanging fruit. And this is indeed what is foreseen in the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, to really focus on the least performing buildings first and to accelerate renovation there. This is something which is also a shift in the public financing support given by the KfW in Germany, away from, let's say, households that could afford from their private savings to invest and get in additional top up from the KfW into really targeting households that cannot afford from their own savings to invest into energy renovation. So this is a debate still ongoing in Germany, how to get there. The third level is district heating networks, something where some of the Scandinavian countries, Eastern Europe, are much more advanced compared to Germany. But clearly it's part of where we need to accelerate a lot, because it's an important part of the solution. According to the scenarios that we have done, we would need to connect about 220,000 homes per year in Germany to district heating networks, while expanding the size of those networks and also transitioning them from sometimes fossil networks to clean networks, so to renewable, and also to employ large-scale heat pumps, geothermal, etc. So these are the main levers which are being debated. What we are trying to achieve, and I think this has been mentioned also for Italy, is that we have this very short-term debate at the moment on how to deal with these extreme energy prices. And of course, it is critical to tackle this, and at the same time not forget about the investments into a structural saving of energy. And I think it is important now that we're not only that we're starting to not only discuss about this winter 22-23, but also are starting to discuss how do we get through the winter 23-24 and perhaps afterwards. Why? Because in this year we still had the privilege of a lot of cheap Russian gas to fill our storage. This will not anymore be the situation going into the next winter, into the winter 23-24. So, and then looking at the timeline for some of the investments into permanently reducing demand, this can well happen in 18 months' time. So some of the heat pumps can be deployed, some of the insulation in homes can be put in place, some of the checkup of the efficiency of existing heating systems can be done. So there's a lot that we can do and must do going through this winter, hopefully safe and to some extent warm, but really before the next winter, 23-24. And I do understand that up to now, many politicians in Europe have been a bit hesitant to call on the population to start saving, because let's not go into this, but clearly going forward, this should be on everybody's mind and should be much more politically encouraged and supported.
Yeah, thank you, Matthias. I think it's a clear pledge for starting as soon as possible with long-term structural measures and to solve the problem once for all, instead of trying to find short-term solutions that will not last by definition. So I'd like to turn to Gilberto, maybe to hear a bit more about Italy and the Superbonus scheme. That is something that is not new, it's something that exists from several years, and it has been looked in the European debate as a real good scheme to solve the upfront cost investments for building renovation. So can you give us maybe a flavor of the results of the Superbonus in Italy, but also maybe what advice would you give to governments that might want to replicate these interesting measures outside Italy? What are the lessons learned? How it can be improved? Thank you.
Yes, we are asking to our agency some comments about the very famous measure of the Superbonus. But just let me start giving you some figures about the very huge size of this measure, because on September 30, 13 days ago, the total amount of investments eligible for the 110% fiscal deduction we introduced many years ago amounted to about 51 billion euro. That is a very lot amount of money corresponding to a total amount for the fiscal regime of about deduction for 56 billion euro. And the number of projects has passed now 300,000. And the good news is that the estimated energy savings associated to this measure is about 9.4 terawatt-hour per year of savings. But nevertheless, it's clear that we had every year a lot of discussion within the Italian parliament among the different political parties, because it's clear that it's a very important measure, but at the same time, it is very costly for the budget law to be renewed every year. As a lesson learned that we can consider, we can say that the current framework for this fiscal deduction measure needs some substantial restructuring on two fronts. The first one, the simplification, because we have many different measures based on different kind of intervention and percentage of deduction. And the second one is to set up a long-term approach, not an approach that is subject to the political decision for the budget law that needs to be issued every year. So we believe that this integrated approach toward these two action lines would improve the access to the incentives, with an impact in terms of increase of incentivized project and also strengthening the effectiveness of public expenditure. A possible modification could be the adoption of a single deduction measure for energy efficiency, built upon a reduced percentage with respect to the 110%. That is a very important percentage, but at the same time to make it stable for the medium time. Because this would convey a signal of stability to the main players and contribute to sterilize the impact of cyclical shortage of materials and workforce now we are experiencing in Italy. So the credit transfer mechanism and the deep renovation requisites should be kept in order to smooth the access to disadvantaged social groups and priorities projects with high energy saving results. And also additional force could be spent on the promotion of building retrofitting approach that address all the complex steps of the production processes. And this objective could be achieved through the development and dissemination of economic, sustainable, integrated technical solutions. A focus on the off-construction methodology, ensuring speed, simplicity of the implementation and durability. And finally, another essential tool to accelerate the renovation process of the building stock is represented by the information campaigns of the citizens. Such campaigns must make users as owners more aware of the role that the energy consumption of their homes affects the energy system of their countries and of Europe, we can say, as a whole, in order to promote deep energy retrofitting of the buildings, also by engaging with part of the necessary economic investments. And mainly in this period, that is clear that all the energy efficiency investment must be continue in order to face not only the current energy crisis, but also the path toward the decarbonization.
Thank you. And I think I also really retain this long-term approach for the Superbonus to give really visibility and clarity and clear expectation, both to the stakeholders that are providing the solution, but also to citizens that needs to make the decision to renovate. Paola, both speakers have mentioned several times in the previous intervention the problem of addressing the least performing residential buildings, the worst ones that are clearly creating a problem in terms of energy wastage, but also a problem for consumers. And most of those that live in the worst performing buildings are also the ones that live in energy poor. You made clear proposal there as well in the Energy Performance of Building Directive by setting maps for the worst residential buildings. This is a very debated measures those days, both in the parliament that is going to adopt its ITRE report on the EPBD, and as well in the council that is expected to have a general approach at the end of October. So how do you see the discussion going? What do you think you would need to say to the more reluctant policymakers in support of adopting ambitious maps?
Yeah. Thank you, Ariana. And indeed, I mean, the minimum energy performance standards in buildings are really at the core of what we need to do in terms of renovation of buildings. And we know it's been a tough battle. And we need to make sure that the ambition is not watered down now in the discussions, in the negotiations. Clearly, in our proposal, the Commission really focused on what we said already before, the low-hanging fruits. Gilberto mentioned the building stock in Italy is essentially still category F. So a lot can be achieved on the worst performing buildings. Making a huge difference, even going to the next category, and we need to tackle those. And we understand that maybe we cannot start with the highest performing categories, that there it may also be more difficult, more expensive. So then at least let's indeed focus immediately on the worst performing, because those are the ones which are also affecting most the energy poor, the vulnerable consumers, and where it will make a difference, not just in terms of efficiency, but it will make a difference socially. It will make a difference for the energy bills. It will make a big difference in terms of the consumption of the building, which in turn reflects in the bill. So it is a question which goes far beyond just the economic, the environment, climate benefits energy efficiency, it's also really the social and economic benefits. So a big plea to everyone to really make the best, and particularly in the current context. And we have agreed, and the Commission has accepted that indeed there may be different levels of efforts needed to tackle the different levels of minimum energy performance standards. We understand that, but there is so much to do already in the worst performing buildings that really we cannot water down. And it's a question of, it's an interest of everyone. We've also put the means for this. We've been saying, and in different proposals, for instance, if you take the Social Climate Fund, where the proposal from the Commission was to extend the ETS to buildings as well as to transport, but then saying, but the revenues which would stem from this extension of the ETS should go into the renovation of buildings, and of course should go into the renovation of buildings of those which most need so. And so there are also means that we are putting forward, and please, in the more so in the current context, a plea to everyone not to let down on something which is goes far beyond just the climate and energy concerns, and even becomes a social concern, and therefore in the interest of everyone, really.
Yeah, thanks. I think thanks for this intervention. I'm gonna check now if there is one question from the audience that is addressed to Matthias Bach, and it's also linked to what you just mentioned about the carbon pricing that the Commission was put in the Fit for 55 package. So the question to Matthias is, because energy efficiency is closely linked with prices, do you think that a carbon pricing could be a solution or a burden for households? So I'd like Matthias to reply, and of course feel free as well to react to the previous speaker's presentation. And I think then the same with you, Paola and Gilberto, you can answer to this question. If the audience has other questions, that's the moment to type in the question and answer box, because we are coming to an end. And if you really have a burning question, please type right now. So thank you. And Matthias, you can start by replying to the questions.
Yes, thank you. So the carbon price, so some visibility on the price of fossil fuels harmonized throughout Europe is really essential if we want to have an energy transition that is to the maximum extent driven by the market signal. So this is something which is absolutely at the center of the climate and energy transition debate. And I'm not saying this, I'm not an economist, but I've really come to appreciate this, the essential need for a carbon price. The question then is, how do you make it work? How do you put it in place in a European context? And there, what the Commission has proposed to have start at least for the next decade, a separate emissions trading system for buildings and for transport is probably in the system which we're working the most sensible approach to take. And clearly this must not be confused with the very high energy and power prices that we have at the moment. It's something different. And indeed, the top up on the energy bill through carbon pricing instruments, it's very small. The current energy price crisis is driven by the spiking prices of fossil gas and to some extent oil and coal. It is not at all driven by the carbon price. And going forward, of course, we will see a normalization of the cost of fossil fuels that we will still need in Europe. And if this is happening, hopefully soon, then we will again need a carbon price to give a robust signal to all those investing into the clean transition, be it for buildings, also for mobility or industry, to be clear that you're improving the business case for the clean investments compared to the fossil investments. So it's absolutely critical. Of course, it's not a silver bullet, but it's an essential component of a functioning and affordable transition. There are other tools that we need to pull. One is a good reform of the whole system of pricing, particularly electricity in the member states, So the system of levies, charges, and taxes on power prices, where just historically in some countries, particularly as well in Germany, we have just built cost components on the end consumer electricity bill, which are in a way financing the transition. And now looking at the relative prices for electricity versus fossil fuels, gas and oil, this is of course not smart if we want to have a price-driven transition.
Thank you. Gilberto, Paola, do you agree? Shortly, I don't know who wants to go first.
From our side, absolutely, we agree because the carbon pricing will continue to play a role, obviously, but maybe in the medium long term, because it's clear that now the very high prices we have for energy, for gas and for electricity, they are already actually in itself as an important tool to enhance the profitability of the investment in energy efficiency and in renewables, so it's clear. But in the medium long term, the idea to maybe to modify for some extension the carbon price mechanism we already discussed at European level, mainly to address the investment for some specific sector like transport, for instance, where there is more need to have investment for their decarbonization. So the role will continue, but probably to take into account the current energy crisis and probably to rethink again the possibility to enhance this tool.
Thank you. And Paola, what's your take?
Well, Matthias said that the Commission proposal was the sensible way to go about it. How could I disagree with him? No, but joke aside, really the idea was precisely to see how we can, through these additional revenues that could stem from the extension to buildings and to transport, which are the two sectors which are so difficult to decarbonize, and therefore you do need this additional push. So that the idea is to really create a virtuous circle, which also enables then the transformations and supports those who would otherwise not be able to do the renovation. So that's the idea. That's the idea. And in parallel, of course, this is only one aspect of the financing stream. As you know, also through the Next Generation EU, in total across the EU, about 60 billion euros should be devoted to energy efficiency and renovation of buildings. So there's a huge momentum, and judging from the recovery and resilience plans from the various member states, we see that there is a clear interest by member states in really investing this money in the renovation of buildings. So we do hope to see really this opportunity seized and very clear impact of this financial means, which have been and are unprecedented.
Yeah, thank you. And I think, as you said, I think the combination of the carbon price with social safeguards to make sure that the ones that cannot pay are not left behind in the energy transition is definitely something to look at very carefully. We are about to close the session, but before we do so, I would like to ask all speakers here present actually to give to our audience one last takeaway message, something that you would like to highlight from the session, something that you've learned, something that you haven't had the chance to communicate, and please be brief. And I would start with Jean-Sébastien, please.
Okay, thanks. So maybe the one message, that's also one message from the NFS project, and that's connected to what was discussed by everyone. Maybe one way to see the energy efficiency first principle is to say that's time to reverse the burden of proof, meaning that there is so much evidence that in some cases, not for all, but at least we know very well that for some cases, and you mentioned the case of the least efficient buildings, that's no regret options. So in that case, the question should not be to demonstrate that renovating this building is cost effective, but that should be the reverse. If you don't do it, demonstrate that it's cost effective.
Thank you. Gilberto, one short takeaway message?
A very short message is that the efficient use of energy, all energy resources is the main tool to establish a bridge between the short-term and long-term commitment that need to be translated into coherent policy response for the current, but also for possible future energy crisis.
Thanks. And Matthias?
So I would say that saving energy has been recognized as contributing to our energy security. I think this is something that is to stay, hopefully. And anything that we can do before the winter 23-24, we should really put on track now. So not only focus on the short term, but at least on the next 2 winters to come. Looking ahead. Thank you.
Thanks. And finally, Paola?
Matthias anticipated my message. So we're going through an unprecedented energy crisis, and really each and every single one of us can help tackling it through energy efficiency in the short term by really saving. And in the less immediate term, and we've spoken, next winter is what's coming, we can already start implementing more structural measures. There are means to do it, there are support to do it. Let's all seize those opportunities because we will not regret.
Thank you all. So I think the message is clear. The short term and the long term needs to look at in conjunction, and that's what we hope to see in the next months. Thank you very much for being here with us today, for attending the European Energy Efficiency Day. To the public, I would like just to remind that our next closing session starts at 5 p.m. and it's about, again, buildings, so energy efficient buildings to improve citizens' health and well-being. So thanks again for staying with us, and a round of applause to our speakers. Bye-bye.
I thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.